Like, how do you do that? How do you go about stealing the most famous car in the world, and then almost 30 years later, people still don't have a clue where it is? I don't understand how that's possible.
I like 90s interiors a lot.
Yeah, peak. I think that's peak interior
Yeah,
design.
and also the smell of the glue. It's great.
You want to slip him a business card?
Yeah, set a business card. You would never hear from me again. If I sold that you'd never hear from me again. Ever. That would be it.
Amazing. Hello and welcome to another edition of RM Sotheby's Car Show. I am Will Smith. I am a car specialist here at RM Sotheby's, and joining me for this edition is fellow car specialist and mate Felix Archer, a regular here on the car show. Welcome, Felix.
Thank you for having me again.
Absolute pleasure. So today, a few topics of discussions. We were going to be joined by our esteemed new colleague, Harvey Stanley, but he's in California. And it's quite early in the morning. So we might still be joined as a guest appearance by Harvey. He was going to talk a bit about private sales. He's the director of private sales in the UK here in London, but he is in America at the moment. So we're waiting to see if he's going to join us. But there's plenty to discuss in the meantime, Felix. And I'd like to start really with the hot news of the week, which is really Formula One coming back. And Lewis at Ferrari and Lando absolutely smashing it in Melbourne, and Verstappen getting more and more frustrated, as we're going to see throughout the season, I suspect. But tell us a bit about, you're a big F1 fan. Come on, what was your interpretation of the first race, and where people are sitting, and is Hamilton going to be able to do anything this year? I mean, it's quite exciting all of a sudden again, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it's just a bit of a shame the rules are going to change next year quite so dramatically, because next year the rules it's the biggest rule change in history. So it will be another shake-up, which in one hand is exciting because it might produce a new packing order. But the downside is often when there's a regulation change, 2 or 3 teams nail it, and then the rest spend years catching up. Yes, you're in a cost cap environment. So unlike the previous decades where teams would blow loads of money on testing to fix the problem, you are dictated by you can't test, and you can only spend a finite amount of money. So it takes years for teams to also, if they have figured out what's wrong with their car, to fix it. But that's we're at the end of this regulation cycle. So as a result, it's unbelievably close. So it's really exciting, and I think it was a pretty chaotic race in Australia.
Yeah, I loved it. Is it raining and not raining, and properly? You can tell the drivers don't really enjoy it or get in any flow because they're just fighting the car the whole way around.
Yeah, and I think it was depending on who nailed the strategy and who didn't, and who boxed at the right time, had a massive impact on the result. And obviously, Lando and McLaren nailed it. But Piastri was really quick, but went off. And obviously Alonso went off, and Sainz went off, and
Lando went off with Piastri in sympathy with him. It was quite a weird moment.
Exactly. So it was a bit of a race where it was kind of, if you survived. I think it's really difficult to get a sense of the true pecking order. I think if you're a betting man, you say McLaren have got the quickest car, maybe, but I think it's difficult to write off Ferrari at the moment, because I think weather conditions and all of that, and also teams learning their car still. So China this weekend, it will be interesting to see what happens. I mean, it could be another downpour, and you're left guessing again. But I think it's a sprint race this weekend as well. But Hamilton at Ferrari is very interesting. I mean, the PR campaign has been strong. If I work for another company, I want to hire that PR team.
Yeah. I mean, it started with his sort of mafioso outfit at on the doorsteps of Enzo's old house at the Fiorano test track, right? And that kind of broke the internet slightly. And then all the subsequent memes that came out afterwards were pretty good. And then I've seen stuff with him doing a testament to driving the short wheelbase Cal Spider that was in Ferris Bueller's Day Off.
Yeah.
And like they did some whole weird re-editing of Ferris Bueller's Day Off, but with Lewis as the driver of the car. Yeah, I mean, PR-wise, fantastic. But surely the longer time goes on that he's not banging in, proper times or podiums or results, like the more pressure is going to mount for him, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's I don't know. I think it was his first race, and okay, it was 2/10 off in qualifying from Charles Leclerc. But then again, there's a few factors. Charles Leclerc has been there since 2019, and he's basically sort of been a homegrown Ferrari boy. He's known that car for the full generation of these cars. And Hamilton has come in with basically 3 days of testing, or 1.5 days of testing in this current car. And this current car is a carry-on from last year. So Leclerc knows it at a very base level far better than Lewis does. I think it's kind of crazy to think he was going to be half a second quicker than Leclerc. But also, I feel pretty strongly about it. I think he's 40 years old. There's no way he's going to be as quick as Lewis Hamilton was at 30 years old or 25 years old. I think it's just not possible. And I think, if you look at like Alonso's, a mega driver. Alonso was out-qualified by Stroll quite a few times last year, and 25-year-old Fernando Alonso would never have been out-qualified by Stroll. I think your single lap pace in qualifying dips first, but I think what he brings is, first of all, he's probably, people might debate this, I think he's the only driver in F1 that's bigger than F1. Everyone knows Lewis Hamilton's name. He's like Michael Jordan or Federer. He's like a pillar of the sport that people who don't know anything about Formula One or watch it or engage with it, they know Lewis Hamilton's name. And I think his experience and his pace in the race is still there. And I think his ability to develop a car is very sharp. The only thing I think is, I think people, expect him to come out and light it up and be rapid. I think the problem Ferrari have is that neither driver had a very good race. Ferrari biffed the strategy. Leclerc and Hamilton had a so-so race. It was just a kind of bit of a non-event. But it will be interesting to see what happens. I still think if he is in a car that is... I think if you put Hamilton in that McLaren, or if Ferrari sorted out in the next couple of races and that car is capable of potentially winning the championship, I think you'll see the best of Hamilton in a race. But I think, look at Schumacher when he joined Mercedes and he was 41. He got smashed by Nico Rosberg. But I don't think that's going to tarnish his legacy. I think I think people will remember him as, the driver that won everything and across multiple rule sets. I just think you just cannot be as quick. It's just it's such tiny margins. If it's 0.2 of a second in qualifying on this grid, that's like 8 places, depending on this. But look what happened to the share price at Ferrari when they announced it.
Crazy.
I think even you'd probably say, what is this his second last year in F1? Maybe.
I don't know, but if he did anything that compared to Schumacher in terms of resetting a team's legacy and enabling a team to sort of then prosper even after he left, in the case of Schumacher, what Mercedes did. So whilst Schumacher didn't have that great success at Mercedes, his legacy is still there for everyone to see, that he helped develop that team and turn it into a world championship winning team. And if Lewis could do the same for Ferrari, I think that would speak volumes to his legacy. I mean, everyone wants him to win an 8th world championship, but is it going to happen? I don't know.
I don't know. I think I think it must be. It's kind of sad that that if you mention Lewis Hamilton in F1, it will be seconds before Abu Dhabi 2021 comes up. And I think that's the difference. I think the difference actually between him and Verstappen, and I think we'll probably see it a lot this year, is I think Verstappen flies off the wheel in heated environments. Look what he did to Lando last year, Piastri and Abu Dhabi last year as well. I think there's a calm and serenity to Lewis when he's driving against someone like Max. But when the opposite, when the same thing happens on Max's side, he's just going. It's like he can't handle it.
Yeah.
And I hope that Lando. I hope that Lando sort of sticks his elbows out a little bit more, because that's, I think, the only way you can. I think the only way to beat Max Verstappen is almost to have contact with him.
Right. Yeah. They're not the first F1 driver to sort of drive like that.
No.
There are hints of early Schumacher incidents, and obviously famously in Adelaide with Damon Hill and Senna and Villeneuve, and inevitably there's always going to be drivers that are more aggressive than others. But I think for now Lando's doing an amazing job at like handling it, being like, I'm not that guy, I'm not that kind of driver, and he doesn't rise to the sort of bait perhaps that he could, and could get very heated. And obviously they're like good friends, Lando and Verstappen. So it's going to be a fascinating season, and it's got everyone hooked again. I think it's sort of, I don't know what Liberty Media are doing that perhaps Bernie wasn't 10, 15 years ago, but it seems as if commercially F1 is as strong as it's ever been, and the interest is massive.
Yeah, and I think people are kind of critical about the big kind of Super Bowl style launch event and how much it's kind of become slightly pantomime, but the racing is amazing.
Yeah.
So you don't have to watch that stuff. You can just turn the race on and watch it, because it's amazing. It's so exciting. I think Bernie would never have wanted that, and never have gone down that route, and making the drivers come up on plinths, like sort of it's like the gladiators in the 90s. But the reason why everyone turns it on is because watch the race. It's amazing. There's like 8 drivers that could win a Grand Prix this year, feasibly.
Yeah. No, it's awesome, and I'm very much looking forward to next weekend and the rest of the season. So moving on, we've got a couple of topics to move on to today. I did want to touch on something actually, because from F1 modern day I wanted to touch briefly on where the F1 market is sitting in our little world, because you've definitely created a little niche, and it's just a massive part of your interest in cars is Formula One. So you've handled and sold quite a lot of really amazing F1 cars in the last sort of 5-7 years. And what do you think is going on generally in the market, and where do you see things picking up, and where do you see the market going in the next sort of 5 years for Formula One? Because it's not going to be long before there's a race series that incorporates more modern machinery, right? It has to be coming at some point.
I think there's several factors that are happening at once, which have created this sort of explosive level of interest for quite a specific era of car. And I think one is there's a generational shift happening, which we spoke about before, where there's people that are coming into money now that were watching Schumacher and Jacques Villeneuve and Mika Hakkinen and Alonso, Montoya, Hamilton, and the rest. And that's the kind of thing they're interested in. I think in motorsport, it's becoming, if you want to buy one of those cars, and more people are wanting to use them, there's more and more teams out there. And of course, the obvious being Corsa Clienti at Ferrari, McLaren have a heritage department, Williams Heritage, and more companies that do something similar. They are recommissioning these cars, and they can run them. And they are also running them at a slightly detuned level to eke out the life and make it more usable, and also...
You don't want a qualifying engine for your brand new Formula One car that's going to last you 3 hours, 4 hours?
Yeah, exactly. And if you look at the stuff that's Monaco historic, a lot of it is DFV, 70s and 80s. Those cars are super dangerous. It's like driving a bomb, and I think the 90s cars, whilst they're insanely fast, they are a bit safer. And I think the market's just going that way. I also do think that Drive to Survive has had a huge impact, because I think America and F1 has really clicked. And I think there's a lot more American collectors buying significant F1 cars.
Yeah.
So it's really interesting. And everything's sort of found its place. There's the uber special 4-time Schumacher winning chassis, Hamilton, McLaren, all of that stuff at the top end. And then there's the stuff that you can go and actually use that might have an okay history, and maybe it was, a second off the pace in 1998, but all of us are amateurs. No one's going to tell the difference, and you're not afraid to use it.
What's interesting is also a couple of clients of ours who, have F1 cars in their collections. You kind of, a good case in point was a nice client who went to go and see, who had, all the kind of road going Ferraris, and then he had this very, very significant. It wasn't a Schumacher race winning car, but it was of that era for Ferrari Formula One car. And 5 years ago, I was quoting him €2 million as a low estimate for that car. Today, I'm sort of saying to him that car's probably more like 6 to 8. So in a very, very small amount of time, certain cars have probably trebled in value. In we're talking since COVID, really. So that kind of shows to me like how this is an area of the market that's actually growing and moving and appreciating faster than probably any other sector right now.
Totally. When we did a video with Chris Harris and Jonathan Kennard from Williams at Williams, and he said something that kind of summed it all up from I guess why would you go and buy one of these cars? And he was like, you can spend £3 million on an F80, and you've got a road car that's X amount of production. It's insanely fast in a straight line. You can spend £1 million or 750 grand on a F1 car that came fourth in the championship in 2001, and nothing you do will ever in your life compare to driving something like that. And once you have driven something like that, nothing will ever compare.
I'll go back. Yeah,
you're buying an experience that is just like no other.
Yeah. I've had customers actually in the past who tried and sampled Formula One cars and then sold all their road cars and just said, okay, this is all I want to do. This is the only kicks I need in terms of driving. I mean, it's a very privileged position to be in, of course, but if you've bought cars well and then sold them, there's still opportunity out there to buy just awesome Formula One cars that, are in terms of performance just on a completely another level. And I'm glad you touched on the F80, because the next topic of discussion is F80 and the W1, McLaren's latest offering in terms of hyper duper cars. It's a really contentious one because F80 came out and not many people were convinced on the looks of it, and then they heard it and then they weren't really convinced on the sound of it, and then they got the price, which, as you touched on there, was like it's £3.1 million. And then McLaren came out with the W1, which is the P1 successor, which is, I think, launched at about, was it like £2 million, Felix? And so then we got this new generation of hypercars coming. And do you think, I guess my question is, do you think the arrival of them is a good or bad time, or is it good or bad for their predecessors, i.e. a P1 or an a LaFerrari or an F50 or an Enzo? Because it seems to me as if in the last few months, there's been a huge uptick in demand for F40, 50, Enzo, LaFerrari, versus a few customers of mine who are down for an F80, and a couple of which have said in the last couple of weeks, like they need to make a final call on it, like in the next week or so, as to whether they're going to buy one or not. And some of them are still undecided. So, what's your thoughts on them, and what do you think these two launches of these two cars has on the predecessors?
I think. Well, I'd be interested to roll time back and remember what the reaction to the LaFerrari and the P1 was. If I remember correctly, it was very positive and people loved
Yes.
it. And it was that sort of, it was helped by the 918 as well, because it was the three of them, wasn't it? It was like the holy.
They were actually pretty. I mean, they were genuinely very, very striking, like just genuinely cool pieces of design. P1 as well, like just an awesome, awesome piece of just automotive design. And those three cars coming out together was a major step forward in the technology and the performance and just the desirability of the premium products that those companies are designing. Whereas I feel like the F80 and W1, I mean, I'm not slagging them off. I'm just thinking it's not the same. It's not as special as those cars were when they came out. And, you know, decisions on the technical specs have an impact to play, right? And, you know, a V6 is just not going to sound as good as a 12-cylinder. It's just kind of fact, unless you get into like fakery and, you know, plugging into the cockpit and doing that sort of stuff. But that's not really why people want to buy these cars. And I just wonder whether or not Ferrari and McLaren to a certain extent are sort of, people are looking at those cars going, well, I actually prefer the P1 or I actually prefer the LaFerrari. And I mean, a LaFerrari is a bit more than around 3.1. It's probably the similar price to the F80, but a P1 is a lot less than £2 million in the UK here. Not sure if that's going to stay that way forever as people can start to use them and service them and not be too scared of the hybrid element of them. But yeah, it's just one of those kind of slightly bizarre situations where you have customers who are loyal to those brands, but they're looking at the car and going, I'm not really sure about this.
And that's quite a scary position to be in, because it could just, I don't know, is that the piece of Jenga that could make things change quite quickly for new models? If people are going, I don't want that. You know, I've actually maxed out. I'm happy with my big five. I don't want this next one. You know, I think if you've got $3 million to spend and you want a Ferrari, a modern one, I think lots of people would rather go for the LaFerrari, wouldn't they? The F80. I think the F80 is also, it's just not as pretty.
No, it's. I mean, yeah, it's not comparable. I don't think in terms of looks. It's very sort of. It looks like a racing car, and it looks like something that is definitely derived from their Le Mans program, and yeah, it looks impressive, but it's sort of, yeah, I'm not quite sure they nailed it on that one, but time will tell, and I guess we'll find out in the coming months as to what the uptake is. I'm sure they're going to all sell out. I'm sure Ferrari has the brand power to be able to sell them, but it's been a sort of slightly muted reaction to that particular car. The W, I mean, looking at McLaren and the W1, I think the reception's been quite positive. I know of a client who went and was invited to look at it and subsequently put a deposit down and is going to buy one. But yeah, I guess time will tell when it'd be interesting when both these cars come out and you get the likes of Evo magazine and all the proper journalists coming out to review them and test them and see what they're actually like. But it will be weird if they review them and they go, actually, the previous generation had more soul, had better sound, had more, you know, more connection to the driving experience. I don't know. We'll see. But W1 versus F80, yeah, it's quite an interesting movement, and definitely those cars coming out, I think, has had an impact on the desirability of the cars that came before, and put maybe even more of a spotlight on them than there was even before there. But yeah, we shall see. Okay, next topic. Cars with ownership history. So we often get offered cars through our day-to-day which have something special about them, have some unique provenance to them. And one of the hardest things that we have to do in our job is work out what premium and what price do you put on that provenance. Now, some of that history and that provenance can be extremely positive for a car. And in the case of Jimmy Savile's ex Range Rover, pretty negative. I would think.
Probably
Um,
proof.
yes, but no, there are cars that we've sold. That Range Rover definitely was not one, but there are cars that we have sold with just the most amazing, unique one ownership history or famous history. You know, we've got a 275 Ferrari, right, on private sales, like right now at the moment on our website, and that was bought new by Roger Vadim, who was like a legendary actor of his era in the 1960s, and you know that car has an amazing story, and you can see the period pictures of him in that car, and yeah, just what impact from your perspective does can history have on the cars, and how do you go about valuing that history? Like, because inevitably, a car that is owned by someone famous from new is going to have more of a desirability factor than one that isn't, right? And it obviously depends on who that is. But I know for sure there are collectors out there that are solely looking for cars that perhaps were owned by people associated with F1 or people that were famous in the music business or whatever it might be. You know, we've seen lots of, you know, Elton John cars and Rod Stewart cars come onto the market here in the UK. And yeah, so what impact does that have, and how do you go about valuing that provenance?
I think depending on who it is, it can have a massive impact, like a huge impact that's just kind of nothing to do with the intrinsic value of the car. It sort of pulls on an emotional heartstring. I think when it comes to take F1 drivers, for example, or musicians, Paul McCartney or John Lennon, their valuable cars are the ones that they owned when they were in their prime in the 60s, or maybe the 70s, when they were young,
Yeah.
And incredibly active and in the zeitgeist. You know, when they were massively culturally relevant. You know, cars that they were. If you watch the Get Back documentary, you could see them pulling up outside Savile Row. Those cars are those cars are worth whatever someone's willing to pay for them. Ultimately, the best thing to do is if you were lucky enough to get a car like that for auction, is you value it as a standard car, and then you let the market decide what the premium is, because it's kind of impossible to predict. You know, if a car's worth 100 grand, John Lennon owned it in 1969. We can't say it's worth 900. It might well be, but we've got to let the market decide that. And that's why it's super exciting.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, a good example of that is the Janis Joplin 356 that we had in New York a few years ago. That was, I just looked it up, it was guided at $400,000 to $600,000, which is a lot for a 356, you know, SC Cabriolet. But okay, it had some unique provenance. So, you know, it was probably on that estimate of 400 to 600, it's probably double what you would pay for a nice example of a normal SC Cabriolet. Maybe a smidge more. But that car ended up doing $1.76 million against, you know, and that's probably 10 or so, 8 to 10 times the value of a normal version of that car. So this was, for everyone who doesn't know, this was Janis Joplin's 356 that was hand painted by an artist friend of hers back in the day, and that was her daily car in San Francisco in the 60s. Like, doesn't get any cooler than that. But culturally, the significance of that car was seen as so great that it you know, $1.76 million for her car. And I mean, I totally get it. I think it's totally justified. But it's interesting to see. And, you know, we've dealt with some really significant stuff over the years. One famously that we handled was the DB5 James Bond car, which there were a few, obviously, that were made and were used in production. But this was a genuine James Bond car. And I think we sold it, was it about 2.1 million on the hammer pounds? I think it was about 10 years ago or so.
Yeah, and 10, something like that.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, 15 years ago, probably. But, you know, that car made sort of about 2.1 million, something like that. But I think today that car would be worth significantly more. Yeah, but it's just fascinating to just get to sort of handle these cars and be around these cars. And, there's always a few that have kind of slipped by the wayside. Like Miles Davis had a Miura SV that I think he crashed while he was quite high on
yeah.
on the drugs. But like there's some amazingly cool stuff out there, and weirdly, that's kind of for us one of the most exciting parts of our job, isn't it? Like just not sometimes you go and see a car and you have no idea, and you look at the first page of the service book, and you'll be like, oh my god, like this was owned from new, or at some point this was owned by this person. And sometimes clients of ours, they come to us and go, we've heard that someone owned this car, and can you guys do some digging? And that, like, we've got an amazing back office team of research guys and girls at RM Sotheby's who literally go to the nth degree, don't they, in terms of just finding out more about a history of a car. And all right, sometimes you delve into a car's history and you discover some things that aren't necessarily particularly helpful to its current saleability. But other times you do, and you find stuff out about these things that are amazing. And you can say, look, here's a positive addendum. We found out this, and this about the car. And it's just one of the more exciting parts, I think, of our job, isn't it? Just dealing with these artifacts that were handled by some of the most famous people in the world.
It is amazing. I mean, the Bond car is a perfect example. If the missing car, which was the car, the gadget car in Goldfinger, if that was ever discovered, for those that don't know, it was stolen in 1997. If that car was ever found, what is it? It's the most expensive Aston Martin ever. It has to be. Is it 25? Is it 30? Is it 40? Who knows? It's this mythical thing. But what's crazy about that car is they took the gadgets off and then just sold it as a standard DB5.
The one that the production company had, they sold it after the film as without gadgets.
It went back to Aston Martin. It stood in the corner,
right?
Until I think it was like 1969, something like that. And they just thought, well, we're going to sell it now, but the problem is we can't give it a warranty with all these gadgets on it. So let's just get rid of all that. So on the build sheet, it says remove non-standard equipment.
Way.
And someone bought it and then looked at the records and was like, well, that's good news. I've got the gold car.
That's crazy. That is absolutely crazy. And even more crazy, I mean, we should probably have another episode devoted to this topic alone, is high-profile car thefts, because it happens. And in the sad case of the Goldfinger car, that car was in an airfield in Florida, was it, I think?
Yeah, Boca Raton Airport.
And it's never been seen since.
No.
Never. Like, how do you do that? How do you go about stealing the most famous car in the world, and then almost 30 years later, people still don't have a clue where it is? I don't understand how that's possible.
Yeah. I mean, there's a theory that it was dumped in the ocean, but I don't, someone's stolen it and they've got a car that is worth a lot of money that can just be sold onto the black market. So I don't know. It might be a controversial opinion. I don't think it has been destroyed.
Okay.
Because why would you? It's just got a very high intrinsic value. I mean, it was an insurance job because it was insured for $4.2 million in 97, which was way more than it was worth. And they jacked up the price every year.
It's like a normal 97, like a normal DB5 in 97 would it be worth 50 grand?
Yeah.
To 100 grand, somewhere in that region?
Yeah.
Just some perspective.
And the owner at the time paid $250 for it in 86. So it can't have gone from 250 to 4.2 million in 11 years at that time, because the market was, it was nothing like today. But yeah, that car is what's crazy. I sometimes think that car is probably somewhere. Yeah.
It has, I mean, or certainly components of it are somewhere. And whether or not it's in a complete form, who knows? But it'd be lovely if it was. And it'd be lovely if what a cool story that would be for the industry, for that car to be found and brought back and shown to the world again. It would be amazing. There was also the guy in the UK, Lord Brockett, who buried his Ferrari collection in his garden.
Yes.
And then had this huge insurance claim. And weirdly, the insurance company actually, I think, paid out on it. And the reason why he got caught, I think it was to do with him bragging about something to an ex-girlfriend, and she told the gardener, or it was something really, really loose. And he got busted, and they found the cars, and the cars are actually back together and on the road and probably certified. They were buried. They were buried in his garden, and it was like a 275, 330 GTS, like some really like decent Ferraris, and he went to prison. And then he came out, and I think he went on I'm a Celebrity or some sort of weird game show or something like that. But anyway, kind of bizarre story. But I think there's a whole episode there on just car theft and insurance fraud in classic car world. I think I'm kind of fascinated by that kind of dark corner of the industry that, no one likes to talk about.
Yeah, and there's also, I think there's an episode as well where there's certain cars that have just vanished and there's no trace of them, and that's maybe not even theft. It's just that car did that race or turned up and no one knows where it is.
I mean, ideal in some cases for certain restorers to then rediscover those cars.
Ta-da!
Knock in some numbers, and voila, here is the missing 917, Felix, for you to sell. What would you value it at? And actually, that is an area where we increasingly have to be very careful, because we do get offered stuff that isn't necessarily kosher, and it's our job to know what should the numbers look like. And even then, there are restorers out there for certain Porsches that we have seen that have the exact perfect stampings for engines, so that for us trying to appraise them, you really need expertise to like X-ray machines and things like that to actually properly identify these cars, because their fakes are getting so good these days.
I know, it's award-winning, but please stop. Just stop, please.
Stop faking cars.
So boring.
Yeah, I would concur with that. So, next up, we have our next topic, and it is news related. And there was something in the news the other day about a certain sheikh known as the Rainbow Sheikh, who has this car collection that's apparently valued at 15 billion, but is just full of bizarre, weird vehicles that he has created himself. So on this link to this article, there's like a 10-wheeled SUV and crazy Fiats and mad paint schemes. But what in terms of extravagant car collections out there, what would you consider top of the shop?
I think probably an agreement, Brunei.
Yeah.
Although, there is, there's some just mega stuff, and then there's some there's one-offs and strange. Well, I suppose it's quite cool.
Yeah.
It's quite mythical. There's all sorts of people
there's
who've been there, etc.
Yeah, there's like a whole Instagram page now devoted to Brunei's collection and sort of documenting historical photos of people that have been there, that have managed to sneak out a few pictures here and there. But that collection inevitably, I think, is about 2,000 strong. And that has within it something like 7 McLaren F1s, numerous F40s that they ordered in right-hand drive, because they used to prefer right-hand drive cars sometimes. So they'd get F50s and F40s in right-hand drive, and no one else was allowed to have those cars delivered. They've got like one-off bespoke Rolls-Royce and Bentleys that they kind of commissioned Rolls-Royce and Bentley to make back in the 90s. I'm told, though, that Rolls-Royce and Bentley back in the 90s survived because of the collections like Brunei that were just commissioning 10 brand new, bespoke, custom Mulliner R's or whatever they might be at the time. So, yeah, I think that collection is completely mythical. And if it ever came to the market, it just would blow people's minds in terms of what's in there, because it's very private. They never share what they have, but it is kind of known through like McLaren F1s being spotted going on planes to Woking and back again, that people have snapped along the way. And yeah, I think that has probably some of the coolest cars in the world that have ever been made, and not even seen, really, sadly. Yeah, can you imagine the value of that of those 2,000 cars if they ever came to the market?
It'd just be it would be mind blowing. I mean, I mean, how old is Sultan of Brunei? 78.
So, 78.
So it's probably about time for him to start, thinking about what the plan is, bro. Get it gone. Get it gone.
Do you want to slip him a business card?
Yeah, slip him a business card. You would never hear from me again. If I sold that you'd never hear from me again. Ever. That would be it.
Amazing. That would probably be it. And there are obviously like a lot of other collectors out there that have wonderful and weird collections. There's a collection that I know of in America that's being kind of, curated and looked at the moment with just art cars. And I think that's an amazing concept for a collection, is like just buy cool art cars and fill a warehouse full of them. Because in itself, that then lends itself to effectively being where the art and the car element and the question, the crossover, meet. And I think that's an excellent idea for a collection. I think if I were buying a collection myself and I had, buckets of money, I think I'd buy a Group B collection, and I'd have the road car, Group B rally car, and I'd have the actual rally car as well. So you'd have like the homologation version on the road, and you'd have the actual rally version. And there's quite a few cars you could actually buy if you go down the rally road. But that's what I would do, is just go full out for rally cars, basically. So, final topic of discussion, Felix. If you could pick an era that you could go back in time and just be a part of, in terms of glamour, in terms of cars, maybe the motorsport going on at the time, what decade would you pick yourself up and go back to if you could, and if you had your time machine?
This is to own. Is it to own?
I think this is, own and experience and be a part of.
That's a really hard question.
Well, while you're thinking, can I tell you mine?
Can I guess yours?
Go on.
The 80s.
No. Despite being a child of the 80s and loving most things that are 80s, and arguably best motorsport era of all time, but I'd probably go back to the 20s. Just because it's so different to modern day, and also because in the 20s you had companies like Mercedes, Alfa Romeo, and Bentley emerging as these sort of amazing pioneers of their racing world. And I just want to go back to Brooklands and go to Brooklands in the 1920s. And for those that don't know, Brooklands is the oldest motor racing track in the world, and it still exists in Surrey, in England, not far away from here. And it's just an incredibly historic place. It's kind of where motorsport in track form kind of began. And it's where companies like Bentley and Alfa Romeo and Mercedes really, really made their names. They had high-speed banking, high-speed oval. It wasn't quite an oval, actually, but it was lots of high-speed banking, and cars flying around at over 100 miles an hour. And I feel like in the 1920s, the kind of performance that was being achieved by these cars was so ahead of its time that it just would have felt like you were standing in the future watching just cars from a completely future alien era that just were nothing like the vehicles that you'd see on the roads. They were sort of 5 times faster. Whereas now, your average rental car can do 150 miles an hour, and your Formula One cars max out at 210, 220, maybe on some tracks. Whereas back then, your average car in the 1920s that you could go and buy, let's say a Ford Model T, that was only good for about 35, 40 miles an hour. Whereas these Bentleys would consistently averaging over 100 miles an hour at Brooklyn. So, yes, if you pick me up, put me in a next to a racetrack and put me in a kind of car in an era, I think it'd be the 1920s. Also, let's face it, it's pretty glamorous. They had, lots of like fun parties. The music got a lot better. Yeah, 1920s for me.
20s. I really did not think you would say that. That's a very interesting answer. Mine would be the 90s.
Hang on, you were alive in the 90s. You remember the 90s?
Oh, the question was that I wasn't alive in.
Well, okay, no, you can be alive in the 90s. So you'd like to go back and just watch all of the racing and be a part of everything in the 90s as an adult who can drive the car.
Like, quite fancy a bit of New Labour, quite fancy a bit of Dream, quite like some of the television music. Great music. The utilitarian, the utility car. Just like London. I'd love to just chat a load of rubbish at the Groucho at the time. Just good vibes. I mean, it all went down. But yeah, I don't know. I quite like the simplicity of the design. It wasn't I don't think there were many necessarily exciting cars that came out apart from, like McLaren F1 and stuff. But I feel like there were lots of exciting designs in the 80s. But I don't know. There's something quite normal about some of the designs. I don't know what it is. I like 90s interiors a lot.
Yeah, peak. I think that's peak interior design.
And also the smell of the glue. It's great.
And the leather glue combo. It's true. Actually, one client of mine said that the only way he appraises a car is in person and by smell. If he gets in the car and it smells right, he'll buy it. Whereas if he gets in the car and it smells like, someone smoked in it or done some dodgy stuff in there, he'll just walk away. So smell is very important because it's that nostalgia. And if a car smells like it did when you were a kid or when you remember having one back in the day, it's a big part of it. I'd agree with you on interiors. So yes, thank you very much again, Felix, for your time. We very much appreciate it. This has been the RM Sotheby's Car Show. I've been Will Smith and my colleague Felix Archer, and we will be back for some more episodes. So please make sure you subscribe to the podcast, and so you never miss an episode. And there'll be much more from us coming up very soon. RM Sotheby's Car Show is a podcast from RM Sotheby's Europe and is produced and mixed by our good friend Johnny Bunyan at Pardon Our French Productions. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time. Thank you very much.